Good morning. Good to have you with us. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Thanks for joining us. We begin this morning in Washington, where an impeachment inquiry into President Biden is now officially underway.
The GOP-controlled House voted 221 to 212 along party lines to authorize that inquiry into the president. Republicans believe the investigation will give them the ability to use the courts to enforce their subpoenas. Also on Wednesday, Republicans attempted to depose the president's son, Hunter Biden. They argued the inquiry vote would help them hold Hunter in contempt of Congress if he didn't show up. The president's son did defy the subpoena. Instead, he went before reporters outside the Capitol, proclaiming his father's innocence, lashing out at Republicans, and offering to testify at a public hearing, not behind closed doors. For their part, Republicans now say it's clear which questions they want answered.
We've spent months in this investigation accumulating evidence. We have a simple question I think an overwhelming majority of Americans have. What did the Bidens do to receive the tens of millions of dollars from our enemies around the world?
Let's bring in NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale for more on this. Ali, good morning. So House Republicans pushed this vote forward despite not yet showing any concrete evidence of wrongdoing or influence peddling by the president. So what is the latest? What more are Republicans saying about this impeachment inquiry vote?
Look, you guys want to talk about sequels. It's impeachment, the sequel, but the shoe is on the other foot. Now it's Republicans trying to level impeachment, or at this point, impeachment inquiry charges against a Democratic president. Last Congress, we saw this against former President Donald Trump. And I think what's so striking about this one is that opening this impeachment inquiry on the part of Republicans is their attempt to better enforce their subpoenas. They say once this goes to court, they want to be able to have that extra leverage. You had all Republicans, every single one, show up on the floor yesterday and vote to push forward into an impeachment inquiry phase. All of them jumped together on this, even though we expected at least one Republican to say no. Ken Buck ultimately voted with the rest of his party. And this is what the key committee chairmen say that shows. Watch.
The House has now spoken, and I think pretty loudly, pretty clearly, with every single Republican voting in favor of moving into this official impeachment inquiry phase of our constitutional duty to do oversight. We now think this helps us get the witnesses, the key witnesses that we want. There were three names mentioned in the resolutions, 918, 917 resolutions, three names. One, of course, was the President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Jim Jordan, one of the key chairmen leading this investigation, has been investigating people like Hunter Biden as well as Joe Biden's brother throughout the time that Republicans have held the gavel, but they have yet to actually have evidence that substantively links these business transactions to the former vice president, now current president. And so I think the way to look at this impeachment inquiry, and many Republicans have tried to tamp it down, it is not an impeachment, at least not yet. And it really is, in some ways, a solution in search of a problem. Republicans continuing to gather evidence for the crime they say they need evidence of.
Let's talk now about the Hunter Biden side of things and what we saw and heard from him. So outside the Capitol yesterday, he decides not to testify in a closed-door deposition, instead make these comments, though there. Walk us through this back and forth of him refusing to testify behind closed doors and Republicans refusing to have his testimony be public.
So this is a tough one, and it kind of bogs down into what's typical in Congress and what's typical in congressional investigations. I think for all of us, this is pretty fresh because we all watched the January 6th committee throughout the better part of the last 2 years. What typically happens in congressional hearings is you will do a closed-door meeting, a closed-door deposition. The committee will either tape that or take notes on it. And then if they want to move forward into a public forum, that's what will happen. That's what's typical. That's what they asked Hunter Biden for. Hunter Biden, through his attorneys, said, no, we're not going to participate behind closed doors. We feel you're going to mince our words too much, and you're going to put this through a partisan lens. Of course, that's what we've seen throughout most of this investigating, even if it hasn't been under the official impeachment inquiry title. Hunter Biden instead appearing at the Capitol yesterday, and I believe we have a soundbite of part of what he said. Watch.
My father was not financially involved in my business, not as a practicing lawyer, not as a board member of Burisma, not in my partnership with a Chinese private businessman, not in my investments at home nor abroad.
Hunter Biden making the point that his father was not involved. Republicans, for their part, seizing on two things specifically. The first, that they're likely to move forward with holding Hunter Biden in contempt of Congress. Of course, we remember how that goes from the moments that we've seen this with people who defied subpoenas during the January 6th committee. All of that goes through the committee, and then it goes to the House open floor. That's going to be a process that we're likely to see in the early part of next year. And the second thing they seized on was his specific language there when he said his father was not involved with his financial business dealings. That's something we're going to hear about a lot, too.
And Allie, real quick, what are we hearing from President Biden about all this?
Look, they are supportive of what Hunter said. That's through Mike Memoli's reporting of talking to folks in the White House. But look, there are some who might believe that impeachment is politically something that they can make something of. And then there are others who are concerned about the fact that casual viewers might see impeachment and the word Biden next to each other, and it could become politically problematic. This is one of those things. No White House wants to go into an impeachment. It's not clear that's where they're going yet, but it's likely that over the course of the next year, we watch Republicans continue to march towards an official impeachment, even though right now it's just an inquiry.
All right, Allie, thank you so much.
Well, the Biden administration is also facing criticism over its handling of the war between Israel and Hamas. The U.S. was one of 10 countries to vote against a United Nations resolution demanding a ceasefire in the war.
The vote comes just 1 week after the U.S. blocked another ceasefire resolution in the UN Security Council. Israel's officials condemned the resolution vote, calling it disgraceful. Prime Minister Netanyahu is also doubling down on his plans for life in Gaza following the war. In a public address yesterday, the Israeli leader said the Palestinian Authority cannot be allowed to take over the enclave after the fall of Hamas, something the Biden administration has proposed.
NBC News foreign correspondent Raf Sanchez is in Tel Aviv with the latest for us. Hey, Raf, good morning. So National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, he is headed to Israel today to meet with Netanyahu as well as other key officials. So it comes after that vote that we mentioned, but also after President Biden's harshest criticism yet of Netanyahu and what he had called indiscriminate bombing. What is the goal here out of these conversations for the U.S.?
Yeah, so Sullivan, the latest senior administration official to come to Israel since October 7th, his immediate priority, guys, is a technical one. The main crossing between Israel and Gaza, it's way down in the south. It's called Kerem Shalom. It's been closed since October 7th. And both the White House and humanitarian organizations are telling Israel it needs to open. It is the only way to get sufficient aid to civilians inside of Gaza. Right now, there are about 200 aid trucks going into Gaza every day through Egypt. That is less than half what was going in before the war. The need is so much greater now than it was before the war. So Sullivan's first priority, trying to get Kerem Shalom open. There is this public confrontation between the Biden administration, between Israel, about a two-state solution, about potentially what happens in Gaza after the war. But there is also this tension about Israel's conduct right now inside of Gaza. You have the president behind closed doors, two donors, saying that Israel bombed indiscriminately, which is a pretty serious charge. The messages, though, are kind of mixed because you have John Kirby, the spokesman for the National Security Council, saying in public before the cameras that Israel is doing more than most modern militaries to reduce civilian casualties inside of Gaza. Not really clear at this point where the administration's messaging is. But in terms of what we're seeing on the ground, Israel's offensive in the south, in the north, continuing. There are fewer airstrikes than we saw before. The civilian death toll is rising more slowly, but it is still rising. Guys.
So, Ralph, this all comes as the UN issues new reports that say the flow of humanitarian aid has largely stopped. The agency also says at least half of the population in Gaza is starving right now. What is the situation inside the refugee camps?
It's dire. The UN is really running out of words. They've used apocalyptic. They've used catastrophic. I was speaking to a woman in Gaza. She says their family right now is getting by on one piece of bread every day. And you see in this war, as you see in all wars and all humanitarian catastrophes across the world, parents doing the same thing. They are going without food to try to make sure that their kids have something to eat. Guys, it's sunny here today, but we are in the winter now. and there has been heavy winter rains over the last couple of weeks. People living in those refugee camps in the south say that they are ankle deep in water a lot of the time. There is just no way to get the water out. There is disease spreading as a result of that. It is a dire, dire situation, and you have basically 1 million people, half the population of the Gaza Strip, pressed right up against the Egyptian border now. There is literally nowhere else for them to go at this point as Israel's offensive continues in that southern city of Han Yunis, telling people to get out of their homes there. Guys.
Raf, quickly before we let you go, we do want to point out that yesterday families of hostages visited President Biden at the White House. What came of that meeting, and do we know if there's any chance for negotiations to continue in that regard?
So there's no formal talks going on right now in Qatar, who have been the mediators of the previous ceasefire, which broke down 2 weeks ago. It does feel here in Israel like the political conditions might exist for another one of those temporary ceasefires. The Israelis have made a lot of progress on the ground, they would say, in the south of Gaza, destroying Hamas tunnels. And there is a lot of pressure right now on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his government from the families of those 135 hostages to do more to get their loved ones out. Guys.
All right. Raf Sanchez, we appreciate your reporting. Thank you.
Back here in the U.S., President Biden did meet privately at the White House with the families of 8 American hostages still being held by Hamas. NBC News White House correspondent Ali Rafa joins us now with more. So, Ali, what was the hope going into yesterday's meeting, and what do we know about what they talked about?
Yeah, good morning, guys. Well, we know that these family members of what is believed to be 8 Americans among the 135 still being held in Gaza, held by Hamas, we know they've met virtually with the president and administration officials before, but this was the first time they were able to meet with him in person and tell him their concerns face to face. Notably, one of the family members in that room was a woman who was held hostage herself, whose husband remains in Hamas's custody. And now this was a closed press meeting. No cameras were allowed in this meeting. No details about specifics were released. But we do know that among the administration officials in the room was Secretary of State Antony Blinken. And the president tweeted about the meeting afterwards, saying, quote, "I just sat down with the loved ones of Americans taken hostage by Hamas to hear their stories. I reassured them that I will continue doing everything possible to secure the release of their family members and that we will not give up hope." Family members met with the press afterwards, and here's what one of them had to say.
We felt before, and we were only reinforced in seeing and believing that we could have no better friend in Washington or in the White House than President Biden himself and his administration.
Those family members going on to say that since a day or two after the October 7th attacks, they were contacted by the U.S. and Israeli governments, and that communication has been frequent and ongoing since that day, you guys.
Ali, what else did we hear when the family spoke with reporters afterwards?
Well, several of them said that they didn't want to share the private contents of that meeting. But one of the family members that spoke was the great aunt of Abigail Adon. You may remember hearing her name a few weeks ago. She was the 4-year-old girl. She turned 4 years old in Hamas captivity, was released a few days later. This little girl's parents were murdered by Hamas on October 7th. Listen to what her aunt Liz Naftali had to tell reporters.
They are just not numbers, and they're just not faces. They are sons. They are sons. They are grandparents. They are mothers. And that is what the president and his team understand.
Her aunt saying that the president and his team have been, quote, bringing out light out of darkness. She asked the world to continue praying for her and the other family members, as well as the hostages, saying that they are still hoping for a Christmas miracle to be able to get their family members home, guys.
All right. Ali Rafa, thank you so much for your reporting this morning. Appreciate it.
Well, in the battle over abortion rights, the Supreme Court is taking up another high-stakes legal fight over reproductive care, agreeing to hear arguments over access to the widely used abortion pill mifepristone.
The drug is used to terminate unwanted pregnancies, and it's also used to care for women going through a miscarriage. The case could lead to a definitive decision on whether mifepristone will continue to be easily available, including by mail.
Michelle B. Goodwin joins us now. She's a professor of constitutional law and global health policy at Georgetown Law School. Good to see you again. Good morning. So this case does not directly address any actual right to abortion itself. This is actually about the drug itself. Remind us the details of this case and what that focus means.
So this case stems from an action brought by a group of plaintiffs that said that they would be deeply offended and also harmed if they had to treat individuals post-abortion. Their case went before a judge in Amarillo, Texas, the lone sitting judge in that area, Matthew Kaczmarek, and that judge gave them a very broad and sweeping ruling that mifepristone could be removed from the marketplace. Now, this was quite shocking in that their claim also included the fact that they claimed that mifepristone had been rushed to the market by the FDA. They also claimed that the drug was harmful and ineffectual. This was just simply not accurate. The year that the FDA had placed mifepristone, approved it for placement on the market, it had been under review for nearly 5 years as compared to about a year and a half for other drugs that were approved that same year. The other thing is that at the year in which it was approved for the marketplace, it had already been used in Europe for a long time. And at this point, it's been used 23 years in the United States. So there is substantial data to challenge those claims, and it has about a 99% effectiveness rate and very, very, very low rate of morbidity associated with it. You know, the Supreme Court itself has recognized that an abortion is much safer than a pregnancy. You're 14 times more likely to die carrying a pregnancy to term than by having an abortion, including with using this drug, to just give some level setting on that. Now there is a challenge by the Biden administration as well as the maker of this drug, and that's where we are. After one last piece, the Fifth Circuit took up this case, which was not to grant everything that the plaintiffs had wanted, which Judge Kaczmarek had granted them, but instead to put the standards back pre-2016 before the FDA expanded the use and availability of mifepristone.
So, Professor, the justices will hear oral arguments early next year. Ruling is expected by the end of June. What will be the situation as far as access to the drug while we're waiting for that decision?
Well, what's so challenging in this particular case is that after the Dobbs decision, the Supreme Court said that matters of abortion would be left to the states, that it would no longer intervene. But what this challenge did was to go before a federal district court judge, and that removal of mifepristone from the marketplace would affect all states, including those states where abortion is legal, like California, New York, Illinois, including those that have passed constitutional amendments. And mifepristone is used now in more than half of the pregnancies in the United States. So if mifepristone were to be removed from the marketplace, it would affect states all across the country. Likely that's not what the Supreme Court would do, but given the Dobbs decision itself, it's a real question mark how far the Supreme Court would go. Let me just say one other thing, is that this is a highly unusual case. That is to say, there's always been deference to the Food and Drug Administration with their scientific review and research of all drugs that come in the market. The worry with a case like this is that there could be any other group that basically shops for a particular judge for a ruling that they would want to remove a drug from the marketplace. Those who are anti-vaccine, for example, could try to find a judge that has anti-vaccination views. This would be very dangerous in the wake of COVID, or there are some people who do not believe that certain prescriptions should be in the marketplace. They too could shop for a judge that would seek to remove certain drugs from the marketplace. And so this is worrying beyond abortion access and rights.
Absolutely. Lots of potential implications. We will stay on it. Professor Michelle B. Goodwin, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Testimony in the New York civil fraud trial of former President Trump, his children, and his company is wrapped up. Closing arguments will take place next month.
The Manhattan courtroom featured 44 days of testimony from dozens of witnesses, including, as you'll remember, the former president himself. Mr. Trump was sued by New York Attorney General Letitia James for $250 million. He stands accused of inflating the values of his business assets to get better rates on loans. Trump has denied all accusations against him.
Let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos for more on all this. Danny, good morning. So Letitia James, the Attorney General, released a statement after resting her case yesterday. It says in part, and I'll read here, the judge already ruled in our favor and found that Donald Trump engaged in years of significant fraud. This trial revealed the full extent of that fraud. She's referring to a ruling the judge made before the trial started, saying Trump did commit repeated acts of fraud for years. So Now what happens from here? What do you make of where we are?
Yeah, remember, procedurally, this is a little unique in that, number one, summary judgment was granted. Summary judgment statistically is not normally granted. That basically says, hey, on this issue, for example, of fraud, there's no dispute. So I can rule on this, and then we'll just go to trial on the rest of the stuff. So that's rare. And then a bench trial, very rare. So we've had a very different procedural situation here for this trial. Now, the defense has wisely, I think, moved on. They did not call Donald Trump at the end of their case. They ended not with a bang, but with calm, detached academic testimony. And that could be something that sways the judge. Remember, you have a jury of one here. And it may be the case, I'm thinking, that after weeks ago with all the hullabaloo arguing with the judge and with Donald Trump and everything else, things calmed down, and maybe this is a judge who may be receptive to the defense's case. That being said, in all likelihood, he's already ruled against them on the fraud issue. Really, if you're a betting person, in all likelihood, the defense has a real long shot here.
Hullabaloo, huh? Is that a legal term?
It is. It's Latin. Yes.
Danny, what do you think we're going to hear from the Trump side of things when it comes to closing arguments? I mean, it sounds like a lot of money on the line.
They're going to stick to their theme. Point one, real estate is subjective, not objective. The value is in the eye of the beholder. Point two, I relied on minions. I relied on accountants. I relied on all these people to do my work for me. It was not me. And thirdly, sort of relatedly, is that, hey, all those people, the banks, they accepted this. They could have done their due diligence. They have an obligation to do their due diligence. You couple that with, they had testimony from Deutsche Bank executives saying, hey, everything was fine with us. They were a little high on the valuation, but that was fine. And then they paid an expert just under $1 million from NYU to do accounting testimony. And he said, look, the books, they look all right. Now, is that enough to get you over the hump? Who knows?
Thank you very much. Well, on Wednesday, the Federal Reserve announced it will leave interest rates unchanged. That was expected. Inflation peaked at 9.1% last year. Well, now it's down to 3.1% year over year in November. Fed Chair Jerome Powell said that while he's pleased with where inflation is, the central bank is ready to act if circumstances change.
While we believe that our policy rate is likely at or near its peak for this tightening cycle, the economy has surprised forecasters in many ways since the pandemic, and ongoing progress toward our 2% inflation objective is not assured. We are prepared to tighten policy further if appropriate.
Committee members say they're penciling in at least 3 rate cuts for 2024. Markets rallied following the decision, with the Dow Jones closing at a record high.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.